Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. So in part 2 of our exploration of Asian horror movies released in 2005, we will finish off some of the less impressive titles and then break into a few of the more watchable ones. But first, we have some honorable mentions to get through. And remember, these are movies that some people classify as horror films, but I do not. The best one, I think, is a film called Shinku, also known as Deep Red, from Japan, which is hard to find but totally worth seeking out. Very interesting film. Another good one is The Whispering of the Gods, from Japan, which has some disturbing sexual content but is still quite good. One that I found mediocre is a film called Blood Rain, which is a period film from South Korea that does have its positives, but overall just didn't really work for me. And some poor entries are Synesthesia from Japan and Slim Till Dead from Hong Kong. You can safely avoid those. And finally, I guess I have to mention Sion Sono's highly acclaimed film, Noriko's Dinner Table, which I classify as a drama, really. And it's also one of the most boring films of his recent filmography. Yeah, I said it. I've sat through this film 3 times, and it simply must have the most blatant use of meaningless narration in recent memory. Constant yapping by these characters for almost 3 hours. And in the end, you basically realize that they said nothing meaningful whatsoever. But as I said, it's highly acclaimed and most people love it. So you probably should check out Noriko's Dinner Table if you have not already. But that movie seriously irritates me. So let's move on here and get to our horror movie reviews for this part 2 of 2005. And the first one is from Thailand, and that is Brutal River. In the 1960s, there were few places on earth as quiet and peaceful as Thailand's Chumphon province, where people continue to live life the old country way. But this tranquility is shattered the day an unknown dead body is found along the banks of the river waterway. Soon after, villagers began to mysteriously disappear for no reason. The local people endeavored to learn the cause of the disappearances and the identity of the unknown stranger. So while trying to track the unknown murderer out there, strange tracks are found, which could have only been made by some sort of large animal. So yeah, this movie is not very good. The script writing is similar to what you'd see on a Sci-Fi Channel original movie. And that's not the only similarity to those films. The action scenes are constructed incompetently, and the protagonists are complete idiots. The CGI is also totally unconvincing because of budget limitations mostly. If this movie were able to contribute some well-crafted physical effects, like a big fake crocodile or something like that, it could have been more fun to watch. It might have had, even if the special effects weren't that good, it could have had kind of a hokey cheesiness. Or if the special effects were good, the physical effect, then you could have had a pretty terrifying crocodile. I mean, you don't need CGI to show a crocodile peering out of the waterline, I mean, come on. And some of the scoring is quite bad as well. So in the end, it's not worth seeking out. You can cross this off your list. Brutal River. Nah, doesn't work. Now the next film here is from Hong Kong. And that is The I-10, also known as The I-3, and also known as The I-Infinity. How many titles do you need for this? And why is it entitled The I-10? Well, you'll see in a second. Now this is a horror comedy, which is quite different from the first 2 I films, which are straight-up horror films. So here, a young man invites his friends to visit Thailand from Hong Kong. He shows them a book he purchased from a strange man entitled The 10 Encounters, there's your reference, that describes 10 ways to see ghosts and spirits. Now, if they start the game, they must complete it, or they will be haunted forever. So out of curiosity, the 5 friends start playing. Well, that's just stupid. So in the middle of the game, one of them disappears, to no one's surprise. Afterwards, an expert on the supernatural warns the friends to leave Thailand immediately. But one of them stays behind because she wants to find the missing person. And then one night, she tries one of the methods and brushes her hair in front of a mirror. I don't know, some type of ritual thing. And the things go on from there. So, the Pang brothers attempt to basically spoof their own Ai franchise in this film, which is primarily a series of ineffective attempts at mixing horror and comedy. I do understand where they were going with this, in theory, attempting to mix things up and try something different, but I don't think it works well. There are a few funny moments, I think, in this film, like there's a basketball ghost scene and a breakdance sequence, which made me giggle a little bit. But the jokes overall did not seem very thoughtful for the most part. I would have preferred a more nuanced, intelligent kind of deconstruction of the franchise, where you kind of bring things back to more basic levels, maybe add some humor to it, and just kind of really get down to the nitty-gritty of what the Ai was really about, and then just make a parody or something like that out of it. That might have been interesting. But really, fundamentally, the script writing of the I-10 is the real weakness here, in my opinion. There was definitely potential to do something interesting, but just the writing just doesn't really take advantage. So I do not recommend this one. Now the next film here, we move to Japan. And this film is called The Haunted Apartments. Well, that sounds pretty generic, doesn't it? Now, a teenage girl and her alcoholic father move into an old apartment building. Her mother died 2 years ago in an accident, and her father really hasn't been able to recover from that incident. Things soon become worse as the two learn that the apartment is haunted, of course. The landlord warns them of the rules pertaining to this apartment complex. That's nice, because usually these landlords don't tell them anything. So the first rule being that no one can move out until a new tenant arrives. That's kind of interesting. The second rule is that whenever a resident leaves and returns to the building, they must cross the rope in front of the property by midnight, for if they fail to return during the given curfew, they will suffer a horrible death by a mysterious force. So they soon begins to see visions of a girl named Ai who lived in the apartment 30 years ago, but mysteriously vanished one day on her way home from school. And the plot goes on from there. So we have a haunted apartment film, which is at this point a genre cliche, but the conditions of the curse itself are different from most other movies, which kind of sets the framework for a lot of creativity. Unfortunately, though, kind of like the I-10, it just doesn't take advantage of the potential here. Most of the horror scenes are mostly run-of-the-mill. Some of the acting, though, is god-awful in this, really bad. For example, the elderly apartment manager is really bad, and a handful of other people. It was pretty brutal to sit through sometimes. This movie falls prey to the genre cliches that I mentioned because of its low quality, because cliches are not necessarily a problem if they're executed well. And at the same time, it fails to take advantage of some of the nuances that it sets up early on. Kind of a missed opportunity. So, I'm not a fan of this one either. The Haunted Apartments, no, you get a thumbs down from me. Alright, the next film here, this one was particularly disappointing, given its good reputation online. And that is The Maid, a Singaporean horror film. I think this must be the first horror film we've covered from Singapore. I don't think there's that many that have been released in the West. So, let's just begin with another convenient Wikipedia plot summary. So during the Chinese 7th month, the gates of hell open, and spirits are set loose upon the unsuspecting world. Hailing from a small village in the Philippines, an 18-year-old girl arrives in Singapore on the first day of the 7th month to work as a domestic maid. Now, she urgently needs this money to save her younger brother who is ill back home. So between cleaning the house and helping out at her employer's workplace, things start going seriously amiss. The girl glimpses strange apparitions at night and also has vivid nightmares. Now, she eventually begins to suspect that something is seriously wrong. Now, The Maid, unfortunately, is a very formulaic horror flick that relies too much on jump scares, which got on my nerves. If you see my previous videos, you know that's usually the case. And it's not only a cheap scare tactic, but the scares themselves just seem very disjointed and seemingly unconnected to one another. Usually if you have jump scares, it might be by the same entity or linked entities. It just seemed like some of the scares were kind of random almost in this one. I don't know. Just the impression I got. There is a noticeable use of weak English dialogue between the characters, which kind of makes the acting seem a bit hokey at times, because it's, you can kind of tell it's probably their second language, and they're not too fluent with it. So, that gets a little dodgy. And the weak script doesn't help matters either. Although I will say that the film does have a bit of a different type of finale to it, which I liked. Its execution is inept most of the time. And this film actually won multiple awards and broke horror genre box office records in its home country. But I think it's just, it's very mediocre from start to finish. I'm not a fan of this one. But it is highly acclaimed, and if you're interested in mixing it up and getting a horror film from Singapore, now you know of one. Alright, the next film here, we're getting to the films that are almost good. We're almost there. Now, the next film here is from Thailand. So Thailand makes a contribution here. And that is The Ghost of Mae Nak. Alright, so set in modern Bangkok, a man is disturbed by successive nightmares from a ghost woman, Mae Nak, an ancient Thai legend. He meets his beloved fiancée to acquire an antique brooch. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I'm sorry. And an old abandoned house through an unscrupulous real estate agent, and they decide to buy the property. Now, after a break-in, human conflict arises and the ghost becomes more active. Now, we did previously cover an impressive Thai horror film that is based on the same legend. That movie was Nang Nak from 1999. So is The Ghost of Mae Nak as good as that one? Unfortunately, it is not. In fact, it's quite a downgrade, I think. So, this one is a rather boring film that has some pretty bad horror elements to it, not very well executed, including some very subpar special effects for the ghost that take you out of the film when she appears. And, you should know by now that I'm very forgiving over low-grade special effects if the film around it kind of works, you know what I mean? But in this case, it just takes you out of it. None of the death scenes were impactful, either from a horrific or dramatic perspective. But on the positive side, there is at least one good twist here to enjoy, and the actresses are easy on the eyes, but there's just simply not enough entertainment value in this one. I say go watch Nang Nak instead. If you like that one and you want a different kind of interpretation of the legend or a little bit of a different flair, then you could check this one out, but don't be expecting it to be as good as Nang Nak. Alright, so now our next film, like The Maid, does have its fair share of fans, okay, and that is The Red Shoes from South Korea. So after leaving her unfaithful husband, a woman moves into an old apartment with her daughter. Now, while walking home one night, she discovers a pair of hot pink high heels. Not red, they're hot pink. I don't know. They should have called this film The Hot Pink Shoes, but I guess it wouldn't have been as eerie or something, I don't know. She found these shoes in a subway car, only to later discover that they are cursed, of course. So these shoes amplify obsession, arousing envy and greed with mysterious, nightmarish visions. So, of course, she attempts to solve the mystery of these shoes before death befalls her. So, this movie is close to earning a pass grade for me. It gets close. But mostly because it has a mix of good elements with the not-so-good ones. So, I'm still kind of on the fence with this one. Unfortunately, it does get off on the wrong foot with some obnoxious scare tactics early on, like false jump scares where there's really no danger there. At least I remember there being no real danger. And other annoyances like that. Now, it eventually offers some decent horror elements and scare tactics, as well as some creepy scoring and sound, which is nice, of course. The production values here are good, which you would kind of expect from a South Korean horror film. But I must say that there's really nothing here that's particularly impressive or even memorable in terms of horror. It is nicely shot and acted, but it's also quite dull to sit through. The relationships between the characters also do not work particularly well, especially the mother-daughter angle. It just, I don't know, they just didn't really seem to have much chemistry there. it didn't really work for me. I think this lady also gets a boyfriend after she breaks up with her husband, and even that relationship really doesn't work. There's not, I don't know, there's something about it. The connections just were not convincing in this. And the mystery element is very commonplace, which you see in many horror films, Asian and otherwise. Script also feels a little sloppy at times as well. But, The Red Shoes is one of those films that I rewatch every once in a while, every few years, because it's not bad by any means, but I always come away somewhat unsatisfied when it finishes. I cannot recommend it, but like I said, it does have its fans, and if the premise sounds interesting to you, feel free to check it out. I wouldn't say you should avoid at all costs in this case. It's not that bad. Alright, so now we've reached the point where these movies get maybe a little bit more enjoyable. Some people might disagree with me on the next film I'm going to cover, but I thought they were a bit more enjoyable. We're going to cover 4 such films this evening, so we have 4 left. And while all of them have their fair share of flaws, in my opinion, I found each of them to be pretty good. Now, the first 2 are part of an interesting movie franchise called the Kazuo Umezu Manga Horror Theater film series. Now, this consists of 6 installments, all of which were released during 2005. And this particular film franchise is one of the reasons why I think 2005 was one of the interesting years for Japanese horror, as we'll see. So the first one we're going to cover is Snake Girl, also known as the Harlequin Girl. Alright, now all these are from Japan, of course. So this is about a girl who visits her cousin in a remote town, only to discover strange occurrences involving snakes and curses. Now the opening half hour sets the stage well, with some interesting stuff, but the viewer may be thrown for a loop at the silliness on display. The 3 main characters are children, and this is portrayed in a somewhat cheesy manner, to be honest with you, and the makeup effects are actually kind of hilarious, I think. However, it's executed in such a way as to be obviously intentional. At least that's what I came away with while watching this, is that they were almost trying to make this as being kind of a cult flick, you know what I mean, with some black humor in it. I thought the humor was intentional. Now remember when we covered Lizard Baby back in 2004, which was part of the Hideshi Hino Theater of Horror series, I reviewed that flick and said that the cheesy lizard design was intentional, but it worked. And I think Snake Girl is kind of a similar situation. Plus, this film was directed by our good friend Noboru Iguchi, the director of The Machine Girl of all films, and many other crazy Japanese films from recent memory, which lends some additional evidence that the cheesiness here is deliberate, if you're familiar with his style. Now, this film isn't nearly as crazy as some of his other films, like The Machine Girl, but it has a little bit of his flavor there. But unlike Iguchi's other films, this one feels like it was made for kids. It really does kind of have like that made-for-children vibe to it, but there's enough of that kind of hokey cheesiness to satisfy adults with that sense of humor. So if you're going with that expectation, there is some enjoyability to be had with this one, because it's a bit different. And it's something that we're going to see in all of these Kazuo Umezu manga horror theater films. They're all very different from one another, and when you watch them, they give you a different flavor that you see from a typical horror film that you would, sit down and watch one evening. Also, the short 50-minute runtime is a breeze to sit through, so that's a positive here as well. So I thought it was a pretty good little film. The Snake Girl. Now, availability on this is that it's moderately available on DVD, mostly used. These 6 films in this series are split into 3 DVDs with 2 movies on each. And I think I'll cover which order I would recommend you to purchase the DVDs after I cover the last one a few videos from now. So I'll give you a little bit of a DVD advice segment there after I'm done reviewing the best of this particular film series. But we move on to another one in this film series here. The next film is called Deathmake. So a group of psychics agree to shoot a documentary inside an old building, unaware of the dangers that lie within. So the beginning of this film is actually pretty good. It lures the viewer into thinking that a nice slasher awaits them, but it doesn't quite turn out that way, and that gives it a bit of unpredictability. There are some nice scenes that are introduced. The first-person car alarm effects are kind of interesting, and the soundtrack is actually very good. Now, unfortunately, the special effects down the stretch are some of the worst you'll ever see in a movie, man. It makes the Sci-Fi Channel look like Industrial Light and Magic. Like, that's how bad it is. The special effects are horrible in this. But, as I previously said, I'm very forgiving of bad special effects in horror films if the film around it is interesting enough to keep me engaged. For some reason, the special effects, I cringed a little bit, but they didn't really bother me enough to dislike the film. The finale is interesting, though, despite the special effects, so your enjoyment of this film will greatly depend on your tolerance for atrocious CGI. So I'm just warning you about that. But personally, I thought this one was kind of fun and rather creative. Again, DVD availability of Deathmake is the same as Snake Girl, moderately available, mostly used. So the first two films in this Kazuo Umezu film series aren't exactly quality films, but, you know, I actually disliked both of these films the first time I saw them, but when I revisited them earlier this year, there's something about them that's just like, they're so different that I admire their creativity, and the quality isn't bad enough to offset that admiration, you know what I mean? So they're pretty good, I think. Now, we shift from Kazuo Umezu to Hideshi Hino, who I previously mentioned, and this is another film in that film series. Japan has some interesting low-budget, creative little film series with stuff that you don't typically see in, Hollywood-style films. So this film is called Ravaged House, also known as Zoroku's Disease. Now, this is a horror drama, again from Japan, of course. So in a rural village, there lives a man with his sister. Now, all is well until one day, the man becomes infected with a bizarre disease that blisters his skin and deforms his body. Fearing the reactions of the townspeople, his parents lock him in the house. But unfortunately, the village chief sees him one day, and soon, this man and his sister are mistreated by everyone in the village. Now, this film uses a very kind of, I would even say almost a bit of an art house style, with an emphasis on everyday events in light of the illness. It's shown through the interactions between family members, as well as the social ostracism that's dealt out by the fellow villagers. So it has a little bit of a dramatic basis here. And with that said, there are some eerie moments here to enjoy that are kind of tossed in and effective at supplementing the drama. Excuse me. One negative, though, I would say, is that the ending of this is very weak and is lacking in either impactful drama or horror. So that's the big negative for me. On the whole, however, this is a pretty good flick and relatively painless and only 60 minutes in length. And again, it's one of 6 films in the Hideshi Hino Theater of Horror series. Now, we covered 4 of these films in prior videos, and we only have 1 left. And we will review that one in our coverage of 2006, in case you were wondering. So I do recommend Ravaged House. And Ravaged House is, again, moderately available on DVD. But remember, the Hideshi Hino box set is available all together, all the films together. And you may be able to find this one on YouTube as well, Ravaged House. So, check it out there. You might be able to see it for free. And then our last film of the evening, our last pretty good film of the evening, is Tomie Beginning from Japan. Now, this is the 6th film in this series. I covered the 7th film, Tomie Revenge, in my last video, and it was really bad. Luckily, Tomie Beginning is a better flick, I think. Now, the plot is fairly generic for this franchise, with Tomie, the girl who cannot die, arriving in a new school again and negatively affecting other students after she arrives. A lot of manipulation here, and a lot of, I guess you could say, demented mentalities and personalities by some of these characters. Now, Tomie in this one is more humanized and outwardly flamboyant in terms of her manipulations. And that's That's a problem I had with a few of the previous installments in this franchise, because that strategy greatly reduces this character's creepiness. It's still true for Tomie Beginning, but this movie is able to compensate by making her the main character here, instead of the normal humans. Or she might be kind of a co-lead with the lead girl, the lead human girl, but she does get a lot of screen time in this. And it focuses on how she affects her many classmates. So, for example, there's one scene in this film that is taken directly from the manga, and it's memorable because of the sheer number of people involved with this scene. Kind of an interesting scene, I think. Now, that event drives the remainder of the story, so you might be a little, I guess during the middle, or the beginning section of the film might be a bit dull, although there is one or two good horror sequences there. But then once you get that big scene with all the characters in one location, and that kind of drives the rest of the film, and it kind of picks up a little bit. Now, in terms of horror, there's not a whole lot of blood on display, but there are a few odd sequences to enjoy. Both lead actresses are good, and this is definitely better than Tomie Revenge, I can tell you that much. But not one of my personal favorites in this franchise. It's kind of on the lower end of the good scale, you know what I mean? But definitely not one you should run away from. Now, Tomie Beginning is widely available on DVD. It's available by itself or in a 2-disc set with Tomie Revenge. So, again, if you're a completist, you could get both of these movies together at a reasonable price. If you're not a completist and you want to avoid Tomie Revenge, you can pick up Tomie Beginning by itself. Alright, so we whipped through those movies tonight. That's it for part 2 of this journey through Asian horror films released in 2005. And remember, be sure to join me for part 3, when we will continue to review the more interesting films from this year. So every part is going to have better films to release, to cover, I guess. So hopefully you enjoyed this one. A few of the ones we covered at the end are, flawed films that I think are pretty good. But don't yell at me if you don't like them. And as always, we'll see you next time.